never been unknown to us and has been best identified with the isolation of the victims and exerting physical, psychological, and at times financial control over them. As the ongoing pandemic epitomizes global isolation, it is no mystery that the rate of reported domestic violence and gender based harassment cases have also gone. Any serious shift towards more sustainable societies has to include gender equality, and even more so during this pandemic. To bring in such an awareness, MES Institute of Management has initiated one-day national level webinar on gender-based violence in India and adverse impact of pandemic. I, Shehnaz Banu, yes, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce and Management, welcome you all to this webinar.
Thank you.
It's a tradition in MES IOM to start the program with the divine blessings. Now I request Srimati Sushmita, Assistant Professor, to render the invocation. Over to you, Sushmita.
Gajananayutam Ganeshwaram Gajananayutam Ganeshwaram Bhajami Satatam Sureshwaram Shri Gajananayutam Ganeshwaram Bhajami Satatam Sureshwaram Shri Gajananayutam Ganeshwaram Ajendra Pujita Vigneshwaram Ajendra Pujita Vigneshwaram Ajendra Pujita Vigneshwaram Ganadi Sannuta Pada Padmakaram Ganadi Sannuta Pada Padmakaram Kunjara Vanjana Chaturataram Guru Gruhagrajam Pranavakaram Kunjara Vanjana Chaturataram Guru Gruhagrajam Pranavakaram Gajananayutam Ganeshwaram Bhajami Satatam Sureshwaram Shri Gajananayutam Ganeshwaram Thank you.
Thank you, Sushmita. Now I request Srimati Nalini, Assistant Professor, to light the lamp. Thank you, Madam. May I now request our beloved Principal, Dr. Sharada, to deliver the welcome address and introduce the eminent guest speaker and president of today's national level webinar. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shehnaz. My voice is audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good morning. A very warm welcome to one and all present here. MES Institute of Management has organized one-day webinar on gender-based violence in India and adverse impact of pandemic. As we know, most of the discussion around coronavirus pandemic are either gender blind or gender neutral, because the arguments largely ignore the fact that the pandemic shapes gender relation in general and renders women, especially in socio-cultural and economic realms, but as organizing principles in the various sectors. So, in this regard, we have with us Dr. Sonali Kusum, a distinguished speaker, assistant professor in Tata Institute of Social Science, for webinar on behalf of management, staff, students. On my own behalf, welcome you, madam. I deem it a privilege to introduce all of you to our young speaker, Dr. Sonali Kusum. Sonali Kusum is an assistant professor of law at Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai. She has qualified UGC NET in law. She holds post-graduation diploma in social work and in human resource management. She has submitted PhD thesis on constructing a legal framework on surrogacy in India at National Law School of India University, Bengaluru. She has received PhD in law degree from the Chief Justice of India, Sharad Arvind Bobde, Supreme Court of India. For her research contribution on surrogacy law in India, she had the opportunity to be invited by Rajya Sabha Committee on Health and Family Welfare to present her views, and her suggestions have been included in the Rajya Sabha report number 102, August 2017. Formerly, she had been research associate at Center for Child and part of UNICEF India project. She has contributed to the legal literacy module book published by Center for Women at Law School of India University. She has been columnist at AIR Law magazine. She writes guest editorial in newspapers and quite a few online portal on medico-legal and public health issue and gender-related legal and judicial developments. She writes online blogs for various medico-legal portals, India Medical Times, Economic Times. She had also written guest editorial in the newspaper as Prajavani and Hindu. She has worked with women prisons in Maharashtra, conducted clinical field research studies on issues of bail legal aid, conditions of maternal health, the plight of mother women inmates with their children, and compiled reports and submitted to IG Prisons, Maharashtra. She has worked with Maharashtra Legal Service Authority and she delivered legal literacy session for the women inmates. She has written 55 articles and published on national and international journals. Her specialization in the field of legal education, pedagogy, rights law, gender studies, child rights, international humanitarian law. So it is my honor and privilege to welcome you, madam. I would like to welcome our beloved professor, a very talented, simple, knowledgeable, very cooperative Dr. Veena Nagaraj, Associate Professor, HOD, Department of Economics, NAC Coordinator, MES College of Arts, Commerce and Science, Malleshwaram. She has accepted our invitation to render presidential remarks today's webinar on behalf of management, staff, students, and on my own behalf, welcome you, madam. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Veena Nagaraj, madam. Dr. Veena Nagaraj is an alumnus of MES College, did her BA in Economics in the MES College, Malleshwaram, MA Economics from Bangalore University, joined as a faculty in the Department of Economics in 1986 in the MES College, Malleshwaram. Madam is also a law graduate from KLE College and LLM from Kuempu University, MBA from MS University, and PhD from Prescott University, United Kingdom. Madam has served MES College in several roles as a student welfare officer, placement coordinator, admission committee, IQAC coordinator, and at present she is nominated as the NAC coordinator. She is in community service activity as a member of Rotract. In fact, she was instrumental in setting up the MES Rotract Club, and it's a matter of great honor that the name of the college was entered in the Guinness Book of World Record in their participations in a mega blood donation camp in 2016. Madam has presented various articles in national, international conferences and published in national and international journals also. Once again, it is my honor and privilege welcome you, Madam. I extend my warm welcome you, Madam. I extend my warm welcome to Professor Siddhananda. He's been instrumental in introducing the resource person of today's webinar, and also my dear participants of your gracious presence. I would like to welcome coordinator of this webinar, Dr. Vajreshwari S. Murthy, alumni coordinator, Sri Vamshi Krishna, his a technical supporter, IPAC coordinators, my dear staffs and my dear students. So once again, welcome you all for this one-day national webinar on gender-based issue. Once again, welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. May I now request the resource person of today's webinar, Dr. Sonali Kusum, Assistant Professor, Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai, to address us. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning, all of you. And it's my privilege and my pleasure to be part of this national level webinar. I'm very thankful to the MES College of Engineering, and I'm also very thankful to Ms. Sharda, the principal, as well as Dr. Vajeshwari, Professor Siddhananda, as well as all the other staff and the faculties who have contributed towards putting this webinar together. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And so today we'll speak about gender-based violence. I think the principal, ma'am, as well as I think the person who introduced us, gave a very good perspective about the magnitude of gender-based violence which is taking place in India, and not just from now, but over the years, this is something which has been happening in India. So most important thing is why gender-based violence has to assume significance in the context of pandemic. Because today we are discussing everything in the context of pandemic, everything in the context of COVID-19. So why during this time, what is the special or adverse impact that gender-based violence problems are facing? First of all, before we go into that, let's just understand the major meaning of the term gender-based violence in the terms like domestic violence or intimate partner violence or spousal violence. See, all these terms put together, they refer to what we understand domestic violence. Okay. Now, very clearly, gender-based violence as a term is a term which is used mostly in the United Nations as well as in the Western legal jurisdictions. Gender-based violence is not necessarily recognized in the Indian context. Gender-based violence in India refers to only domestic violence. So here it is very important that we understand what is the meaning of gender-based violence and domestic violence, why these two things are though similar but not exactly the same. So gender-based violence very simply and clearly means a violence which is perpetrated by one gender which is more powerful on the weaker gender. Like one powerful sexual group has, as a class, perpetrates violence on the other, which is a weaker group. So generally it is understood that men have more power, so they are perpetrating violence on the weaker sex, which is women. But right now in the contemporary context, gender-based violence in a larger perspective also includes violence which is perpetrated on men. Because the idea on gender-based violence is violence on the ground of gender. Okay, so it can include male as well as female. Whereas when we compare the Indian context, domestic violence, what is understood is that domestic violence in India refers to only such violence which is perpetrated on women by men or by the relatives of the men. Okay. Now, domestic violence in Indian context is also different because we only refer to such violence which is perpetrated in the marital home of the women. We are not talking about family violence here. It's also important that we have to understand that in Indian context, domestic violence refers to only those violence which is taking place in the woman's marital home by her husband, by her in-laws. We are not referring to the violence which is perpetrated on a woman or a girl child, let it be a sister or let it be a woman in her own matrimonial home. So in domestic violence in Indian context, we are only understanding the violence which is perpetrated in the marital home of the woman by her husband and in-laws. We are excluding any kind of violence which is taking place in your own maternal home. So that is also one very clear understanding on what is the meaning of domestic violence. Okay. Now, a very good definition of domestic violence is always given in the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, that is DV Act, as we generally refer to 2005. So that legislation itself gives a very elaborate definition of domestic violence. Now, it's important that we reflect on that definition of domestic violence because there certain terms are used as to what is domestic relationship, what is the kind of violence which is included under domestic violence. So, and also who is an aggrieved party, right, against whom you can file complaints. So, we have to understand the legal perception and the meaning of domestic violence as per the DV Act 2005. Now, under the DV Act 2005, first they define the term what is domestic relationships. Now, under domestic relationships, that is a bracket wherein they define what relationships are there, which against whom, if you perpetrate violence, they are included as domestic violence. Like they include all relationships which are marital, which are also relationships which are related to, which are taking place in a marital home. So usually the confines of the violence which is taking place, it means under the domestic relationship, if you're facing any violence, those violence are included under Domestic Violence Act. Secondly, it also defines who is an aggrieved party. Generally, it is the woman who is the aggrieved party. Okay. In India, we do not include men as the aggrieved party. So that is why a lot of times, if you see in the present context, people are saying that why men also face violence at home, in the marital home from the wife or their other family members, then why it is not included under the Indian Domestic Violence Act. Now, the issue is under the DV Act, only women can be the aggrieved party. So presently, it can be daughter-in-law, it can be also mother-in-law also can file petition. So basically, so these are the only two aggrieved parties who can file for petition for domestic violence. So this is something which is very clear. That is why men are not allowed, only women are allowed. And that is also the reason because under Article 15, Clause 2 of Indian Constitution, as well as read with Article 14, we say right to equality, equal treatment. Secondly, we say equal protection of law, read with the power of the state to ensure that there is no discrimination on the ground of gender. Also, the state has the power under Directive Principles of State Policy, Part 4 of Indian Constitution, to say that there are welfare schemes which are started by the government for protection of weaker or vulnerable section of society like women and children. So based on these special provisions, this particular law, Domestic Violence Act, DV Act, that is the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005 is initiated. And that is why the special safeguards or protection is given to women, that only women are allowed to file the complaint against domestic violence. Okay. So this is legally speaking, this is the legal basis for it. It is to be understood clearly that this is not a case of discrimination against men, but this is the example of special protection given to the women by the state. And this is also based on the idea that domestic violence has been taking place in India from quite long. And there are statistics to say that every year, if you see the National Crime Records Bureau data, also if you see the data of National Family Health Survey, annually these are published, every year you see there are very large number of cases of domestic violence. Now, also domestic violence is such an issue which takes place pan-India. It is not confined to only rural women or urban women or rich and poor. It is something which cuts across all class, all sections of society. So this is common and this has been happening and there are statistical records. Therefore, it is very important to understand what is the basis for this law. Because on one side, a lot of legal critics say that when you have Article 14, why give special protection to women? This is to be answered with the fact that there are statistics, NCRB, National Family Health Survey, sorry, National Legal Aid Services Authority, NALSA. There are reports to say that. Secondly, our historical and social construction is also such in society that there have been violences and we have records. Not only legal but also sociological studies have supported it. Plus, we have special provision under DPSP. There are special provisions under Article 415 also, which empowers the state to make special law. So this has to be clearly understood. Now, let me just discuss a little bit about the legal definition of domestic violence, which is provided under the DV Act 2005. Now, under the DV Act, first of all, it has given an elaborate definition of domestic violence. Okay. Now, domestic violence under the DV Act includes certain forms of violence. Like, what are the forms of violence? Generally, when we speak of domestic violence, we usually refer to physical form of violence, any kind of physical force applied, like any violence which is taking place physically. Second is also the psychological violence, which is included, like emotional torture or trauma, mental stress. These are included. So physical, psychological. Then there is also sexual violence, issues of intimate partner violence, like any kind of sexual abuse and other things are included. And other form of violence is also included is economic violence, which is a new contemporary form of violence. Any kind of violence which is basically depriving you of any resources, okay, to live. Even if you are a homemaker at home, you are entitled to certain amount of share in the day-to-day expenses. You are allowed to have certain right of maintenance. You are allowed to have certain economic rights also, right? So those rights, if you are deprived, that is also a form of violence, which is economic violence. Now, let me just focus a little bit more on the concept of domestic violence under DV Act. See, what happens, I'll give you an instance as to understand domestic violence. Like, there is no physical slapping or any kind of physical force applied, but what happens if the person is completely if, for instance, the mother-in-law or the husband or whoever is the husband's relative, he confines a woman to one room of the house. There is, let's say it's a house of 3-4 rooms. The woman is confined to only one room. Okay, she is not allowed to step out, meet and interact with other members of the family. She's kind of, ostracized, or she's kind of excluded, and she is not given any chance to speak to everybody. She's not allowed to enter the place where the gods are kept. I mean to say, the place where you worship, the room where you worship. She's not allowed to probably enter the living space. She can only go to the kitchen and her bedroom, right? If this is the condition, do you think it is domestic violence? Actually, it is the form of domestic violence because it causes emotional stress, mental trauma. Because what happens is you are confining her, you are excluding her from interaction from the house space. She is not allowed any kind of a right like that. So this is also a form of violence without having any facet of violence, any act of physical violence. This is also emotional violence. Now, in today's context, I would also like to highlight one more thing. What is missing under the DV Act? What form of violence is the cyber-related violence? Okay. Now, we have included under the DV Act physical, psychological, economic, as well as sexual. What is lacking is any kind of violence which is related to cyberspace or digital space. Like, usually it is understood that, when two people who are in domestic relationship, who are living together as married partners, they may have access to each other's private pictures. They may have access to each other's digital records. So probably it can be such that you may leak a data, you may leak a private picture, you may leak an intimate picture, and you may threaten the other party that you will leak it on the WhatsApp, you will spread it, you will misuse it. So that cyber-related violence is missing presently in the DV Act, which is very, very important and crucial at today's day and time, because today is such a digitalized world. The whole world is functioning through digital medium. So cyber-related violence is not included, though any kind of complaints with respect to cyberspace is to be addressed in the Information Technology Act 2000, but this has to be added. Okay. Now, there are other forms of violence also which is not included. Any kind of violence which is taking place on the women because of any socio-cultural, or blind faith practices or superstitious practices. I'll give you an example of that also. This is again missing in the DV Act. any kind of violence which is perpetrated on the women because of superstition or social cultural pressure. One of such is, if you see, there are certain communities or sections in our Indian society, they do not allow medical termination of pregnancy or abortion, what we call. They will not allow the women to use, any kind of family planning measure. Okay, because culturally or social cultural background is such, or they have that kind of a thing that they will not allow women to decide on if they want to carry pregnancy, they do not want to carry pregnancy. Like they want to terminate the pregnancy, they do not want to terminate the pregnancy. Okay, then if they want to use family planning measure, they do not, or the choice is not given to the women. Okay, so things like this, if you see, these are some things which are again not addressed in the DV Act. So this is something which is why, if you see, still issues of domestic violence are cropping up, because the act itself, though it is good piece of legislation, but it lacks some kind of revision in terms of the present context. Now, I hope I have cleared the concept of domestic violence, gender-based violence, and the special provision for women. Now, let me just talk about the present context. Why in COVID context, this domestic violence is rising at such a high rate? Okay, because as the title says that it is increasing, and we have read it in the news reports, media, everywhere, that DV cases are rising. There are 3-4 very important and clear reasons for domestic violence to have such a recording and alarming number during the pandemic. Firstly, because the whole lockdown following the COVID breakout happened very unannounced. Okay, it happened all of a sudden. It started with a, suddenly out of jerk, suddenly the government announced that it is going to have a lockdown. Then the lockdown subsequently increased and all that. So what happened? Women who were already facing violence, they are made captive in their home. They are confined. They cannot step out. They could have gone probably to their own mother's home, or they could have gone to some friends or relatives' home. Now that option is completely denied to them because it is a lockdown. Outside, that only essential services are permitted to step out of the home. Now, a victim of domestic violence is also facing probably physical injury, probably is going through a lot of mental stress, trauma, probably that is constituting abatement to suicide also for them. But that is not included under essential service. So any victim of domestic violence, even if they need some treatment, for instance, if there is a physical injury or bruise, the person may need some kind of a medical help, right? Treatment, maybe some tests to be conducted, maybe some doctor consultation, medication, but that's not included in the essential services for you to be permitted to step out of the home. So you are confined in the home. What is the adverse impact of it? You are denied access to family home. You are facing the problem, and maybe the problem is escalating. Today it is only, let's say, lesser problem. Tomorrow it reaches to a higher magnitude, higher level of physical pain or physical or psychological trauma. It is also giving rise to a continued and escalatory violence. Today you are facing, tomorrow again you are facing, then it is escalating. So what is the impact on the physical mental health of the person, right? So that impact is there. Secondly, what happens is, one, because of lockdown and lack of recognizing it as essential services. Thirdly, very important reason is the police and access to police, access to the court is also restricted during this COVID. See, access to police, we all know that at any crime or any kind of issue, police is the first law enforcement agency of the government of India where you can go and report. Now, police is largely busy all over the country with their own lockdown duties, ensuring curfew, ensuring, the law and order situation. Okay, largely the police is busy with this. And again, only there are few police stations in India where there are women police officers, where there are online services which is available. See, not all police stations are well equipped to receive your SMS FIR through online. Right now, zero FIR is also allowed as per our government circulars, that any kind of issue against women, you are not necessarily bound by the issues of jurisdiction and all. You can complain to any police station, not necessarily to the police station of your area. But then this concept of zero FIR is also having very lesser working during the time of pandemic and COVID, because police itself is busy with this. Okay, many cases in the media and all that, police themselves have suggested that they do not have that kind of a vehicle right now to come and take the victim of domestic violence to the hospital and to get their treatment or to register their FIR. So that access to police is restricted. Then let's come to the court, how the courts are functioning. Now the courts also, we all know through the Supreme Court order in March, April, if you see this year, Supreme Court is functioning through video conferencing. Now only urgent matters are listed. So one of the issues, domestic violence probably may or may not get listed. So again, access to court is restricted. So under such situation, you have another ray of hope, which is the Women's Commission at the state and the national level. Now, Women's Commission again is not sitting regularly because of the lockdown and the COVID and social distancing norms. So what happens is you have access to Women's Commission, no doubt, but only through emails and online services. Now let's for a second think of it. How many women in India would have their own separate email IDs and accounts and mobile phone? Because if such a woman is facing violence, it is quite understood that she is suppressed in the family. She may have been made subordinate. So she may or may not have internet. She may or may not have a separate account. And she, for all we know, she may not be fluent or familiar with English to file a complaint like that online. So again, access to the Women's Commission is restricted. So under such situation, the cases of domestic violence is increasing. Okay. Now, one important factor I would like to add to this list as to why it is increasing is again, most of the, if you see prisons which are affected by COVID, jail issues, they are also releasing a lot of under trials as well as convicts on bail, on parole. So what happens when they are returning home? Probably they are also, because they are probably offenders, so they are also returning home. They probably could be causing violence on their family members. So these are some clear issues as to why domestic violence is increasing during COVID. Now, I would like to speak about one very important report of NASA, National Legal Aid Services Authority. It is National Legal Aid Services Authority on legal aid during pandemic 2020. This is a report which is compiled by National Legal Services Authority with respect to what kind of legal aid they have rendered and what are the issues which are cropping up right now during the pandemic. So in this report, they have highlighted that the cases of domestic violence have increased very significantly. In fact, they have done a division of the states wherein the issues are very largely witnessed. In fact, Uttarakhand has largest number of cases of domestic violence. Then we have Delhi, then we have Karnataka, which have faced a very large number of complaints and issues of domestic violence during the pandemic. Now, when I'm saying during the pandemic, you have to understand these are issues only starting from March to April or May. So during 2-3 months, there are complaints amounting to 700, 800, which are being reported to NALSA on domestic violence. Okay, let me just share my screen and show you some statistics, if that works, with respect to, just give me a minute. Yeah, this is, I hope it is visible to everybody. Is my screen visible to everybody?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Okay. Fine, then I think I will just read it out. Basically, it is Uttarakhand, which has the largest number, around 144 cases. Then we have Delhi and Haryana, around 79 to 63 cases during pandemic from March to April. Okay. Now, I would just like to focus upon what has been the role of the various legal authorities in controlling this pandemic issues. Okay. Now, one of such, first, as I said, the role of the police is very significant. It's not that the police is not helped with respect to the pandemic. Most of the cases, the police, especially in Delhi and other places where there are lots of NGOs which are helping the police as well as the victim in reaching out the remedy. One of the things the police has done is they have also started mediation. They have also started providing some kind of telephonic services. Okay, the police is helping the victims to link to some other NGO or counselors which can provide some kind of immediate help. Okay, so this is one way police is helping. The other thing is also Women's Commission, okay, at Delhi, National Women's Commission. They have initiated some kind of a program with respect to controlling this domestic violence issues in pandemic. They have started their telephonic services, online services. They have provided counselors. Special WhatsApp number has been created. Also, Women's Commission is instructing the police as well as the NGOs to assist the victims to ensure that they are moved to some kind of a safe places. Okay. When I'm saying safe places, basically some kind of a shelter home, some alternative from where the victim can be taken from their family, from their existing marital home to some other places. So this National Women's Commission, they have started some kind of a services with respect to domestic violence during pandemic. This is largely with respect to providing online help, making the police more sensitive to understand what could be the needs of the victim, moving them to safe places, providing them medical treatment. These are some measures which Women's Commission has started from March, April 2020. Now, another important thing is the contribution of judiciary in recognizing the problem of domestic violence during pandemic. During this whole period of March till let's say May 2020, just within 3 months, considering very high number of domestic violence cases, there are 3-4 important high court judgments which have come up. I wanted to show my screen, but I don't know if that is possible. Hello.
Maybe you can just try sharing it again once.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
just try share again.
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Yes, ma'am. We are able to see now.
Yeah, I'll just go to the judgment part because this is what I was discussing, the role of the National Women's Commission. Since I've addressed this and keeping with the time limit, I will go to the issue of the landmark judgments which are there. Yeah. So these are some important landmark judgments which I want everyone to have a look at it. The
I'm
first
sorry to
one,
interrupt you.
sorry, yes.
Yeah, are you just showing us the screen of the window, or you are opening that respective PDF?
Yeah, can you see this PDF now?
No, I'm just able to see the window.
Okay, I'll just try once again.
Yeah.
Needs to open it.
Is it okay?
Yeah, maybe you need to share the document, like when you're share screen, right? When you're clicking on share screen, maybe you need to hit on share the document rather than the this particular window.
Share document. Okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I can speak. I think that would be better because let's not get into the technicalities. I don't know. So let's just, I'll be able to speak about it. So that's okay.
Okay, ma'am. Sure.
Maybe you can open that file. You just try opening the file, ma'am. It may be visible.
No, it's all right. Let me speak because unnecessary interruption. Let's continue with the flow. It's good. Yeah, so there are 4 landmark judgments with respect to the issues of domestic violence. The first one is that of Jammu Kashmir High Court. That is the first judgment of re-court on its own motion versus Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh. This is of April 2020. I'll just repeat it once again. Re-court on its own motion versus Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh. So this first judgment of the Jammu Kashmir High Court, important thing to notice here is it is a suo motu case. The High Court took cognizance suo motu based on the high rising number of domestic violence. Some of the most important directions which are given in this case are with respect to creating a separate funding by the Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh to address the issue of domestic violence victims. When I'm saying funding, the funding is to be used for the medical treatment of the victims of domestic violence. The funding is also to be used for taking the victims of domestic violence to maybe a safe place. Another important direction by Jammu Kashmir High Court is to designate safe places for the women. The idea of designating safe places is also taken from the Domestic Violence Act, which provides for women victims of domestic violence to be given a separate shelter home, okay, which is sponsored by the government. Okay, so such kind of a shelter home facility should be provided to the women. Now, another important thing is they have also, Jammu Kashmir High Court has instructed that all the cases which are pending, they have to be scrutinized, they have to be re-looked into so that the cases can be disposed of. Okay, so that is another important direction which is there with respect to Jammu Kashmir case, that is the suo motu, re-court on its own motion versus Jammu Kashmir Union Territory and Ladakh. Another thing is with respect to generating awareness, because at this time, many women as well as the many victims of the domestic violence themselves are not aware that where this kind of help and services could be available. So the Jammu Kashmir High Court has directed that the contact numbers, the regular WhatsApp number or email IDs, contact details should be shared so that the victims can access the help. So this is another important direction by the Jammu Kashmir High Court. Then we have another very important judgment by Delhi High Court, that is All India Council of Human Rights, Liberties and Social Justice versus Union of India. This is a judgment again of the April 2020. Now, in this judgment, an important thing is Delhi High Court also directed the police that you have to be sensitive to the victims of the domestic violence. You have to ensure that some kind of essential service permit is even given to the victims of domestic violence who can be taken to hospitals because they also need some kind of a medical treatment. So this provision of, this direction of the Delhi High Court is also very landmark with respect to assisting the victims of the domestic violence. Then, since we are discussing this issue in the Bangalore, so I'll also like to speak about the Karnataka High Court judgment, which has also come with respect to domestic violence. Now, the Karnataka High Court also on April 24, 2020, they gave certain directions with respect to addressing domestic violence issues in Karnataka state. They directed that most of the issues of the domestic violence has to be addressed through one-stop center that is called Santavna scheme, which is started by the Ministry of Women and Child, State Government of Karnataka. They said these are some kind of a counseling help where, this provides one-stop center, as in medical aid, legal counseling, also some kind of a, psychosocial counseling, what kind of assistance the victim needs who's faced with domestic violence. Does she need a legal help? Does she want to file an FIR? Does she want to report the case to the magistrate? Or does she want some kind of a medical assistance? Or does she want some kind of a counseling, psychological, social counseling? So these kind of things are to be provided by one-stop centers, Santavna schemes. And present in Karnataka, there are 193 Santavna centers which are created. And this Santavna center, the salient aspect about it is also the presence of the women legal counselors. Mostly in the Santavna schemes of the state of Karnataka, there are women paralegal volunteers, women counselors, so that the victim feels a little more comfortable in discussing these issues. So, and besides that, there is another very important judgment, that is Sudha Ramalingam versus State of Tamil Nadu, April 2020. This is by Madras High Court. There also, the Madras High Court has directed that whatever the cases of domestic violence are taking place right now, the Health Services Department, that is the regular state government hospitals and all that, they should not only provide free medical treatment and get these victims some kind of medical help, but they've also suggested that records should be kept of the issues of what kind of domestic violence is taking place and issues. So that is another important direction which is given by the Madras High Court with respect to the issue of domestic violence. Okay, so largely if you see all these high courts, whether it is Jammu Kashmir, Delhi or Madras or Karnataka High Court, the focus of all these judgments have been how to provide women legal aid, how to provide online telecommunication service so that their complaints can be noticed, how to provide them counselor help, how to provide them medical help, how to ensure that the women can be taken to a better place or safer places, how to ensure that the women's medical needs are met. So largely these are the overall major directions which are given by these landmark high courts. So these are some cases. Besides this, an important thing is also with respect to the role of National Legal Services Authority. In present time, National Legal Services Authority during pandemic is playing a very, very significant and crucial role. Not only they have compiled a report which demonstrates the statistics with respect to the magnitude of domestic violence, because that itself is a huge contribution. Because after a year or so, if you want to study what has or any research has to take place as to what has been the impact of pandemic on gender or gender-based violence, then we have to refer to the NALSA report, because it is for the first time they have brought in which states there are larger problem, what kind of problem. So this identifying the size and magnitude of problem. Besides that, NALSA themselves have created a lot of model one-stop centers where they are providing legal counseling through online and WhatsApp facilities also. They're also helping women to link to the police, to link to the protection officers which are appointed under DV Act to access the remedy. Now, I think I would like to stop. I thank you all for your patient listening. I hope the lecture was insightful to all of you. And thanks for having me and giving me this opportunity once again. I thank the principal. I thank Dr. Varjeshwari, Professor Siddhananda. I thank all the other colleagues and faculties who have put this program together. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for taking time out of your busy schedule and sharing such insightful sites with us. Uh, I now request Professor Veena Nagraj, Associate Professor, HOD, Department of Economics, NAC Coordinator, MES College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Bengaluru, to deliver the presidential remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Sonali. It was a very wonderful insight into, gender-based violence and domestic violence. When we think of violence, there are a few typical types which come to our mind, like physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, psychological. Most of the times, what we generally feel is this kind of a violence erupts or comes out mainly because of either the status issues or ego issues and such elements. um, Either the social circumstances or the family circumstances bring them out in such a way that bringing out a remedy becomes a big issue in the society for such things. Nearly 60% of the men, I believe, are under the impression that women must tolerate violence to keep the family together. I mean, that has been being a patriarchal society, that has been put into our society in the thinking process, that it has continued, and it's an alarming rate that 60% of the men continue to think like that. Along with this kind of a domestic violence, there are so many other types of atrocities on women which are carried on, like honor killing, female feticide, rape, human trafficking, and forced prostitution, acid attacks. So when all these are looked at, it becomes, it's a natural feeling that the situation around us is not safe, and no person or no citizen should be made to feel unsafe in a country. That's my sincere feeling. Dr. Sonali, you have been such a wonderful speaker. Age is certainly on your side. You have brought out a lot of laurels for yourself personally, and I'm sure, being such a highly educated resource person, you will go a very long way. You brought up the clear cut distinction between gender based violence and domestic violence, first of all. And your explanation of the Domestic Violence Act was very lucid. You touched upon Jammu and Kashmir Acts and our own Karnataka Government's Act. And yes, you brought out and you explained this Santvana scheme. It was it was, I think, announced in the last week of April to 2020. This kind of a need for bringing in people who are suppressed, who are under a lot of violence, certainly needs the attention of the government. It was in this context that you touched upon the role of women's commissions in the states. And I must say that this kind of a talk is the right step in the creation of awareness to bring down the atrocities and the violence against women, and put a final halt to the whole suffering that women can have. I congratulate MES Institute of Management, all the people involved in putting the whole idea together and making us become aware of what can be done for all this. The next right step would be to become a little more socially conscious, financially independent, and I won't say fight for the right, but at least be aware of the rights. The 21st century woman has certainly come out of the kitchen, but the man is yet to come into the kitchen fully. And therein lies, a lot of issues related to violence and sufferings and all that. So sincere thanks, Dr. Sonali, for your insightful talk. And thank you, Madam Sharda, and everyone connected with this particular, webinar. Thank you very much. Have a very
Thank
good
you,
day.
Professor Veena, for your kind words. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for sparing your valuable time and joining us today in this webinar. Now I request Dr. Vajreshwari S. Murthy, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to propose the vote of thanks.
An equal world is an enabled world. A very good morning to one and all. It's my privilege to present vote of thanks on this occasion. First and foremost, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Sonali Kusum, Assistant Professor, Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai, for accepting our invitation to be a resource person. Madam has spoken about gender-based violence in India and adverse impact of pandemic, which was very inspiring and informative. Thank you very much, Madam. My heartfelt thanks to Dr. Veena Nagraj, Associate Professor, HOD, Department of Economics, NAC Coordinator, MES College of Arts, Commerce and Science, Malleshwaram, Bangalore, for presiding and gracing the occasion. Thank you so much, Madam. I also thank our beloved principal, Dr. Sharda S., for being supporting. Thank you, Madam. I also thank Professor Siddhananda Sir, retired Associate Professor, SDR College, for being instrumental in inviting today's resource person. I also thank all my colleagues, both teaching and non-teaching staff, for participating in today's program. My special thanks to our proud alumni, Mr. Vamshi Krishna, for the technical support in organizing this webinar. I also thank participators for your presence and gracing this occasion. Without your involvement, this event would not have been successful. A woman with a vision empowers an empire of women to do more, see more, and become. So I once again thank you all for being with us today. Thank you. Have a great day.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Vajreshwari S. Murthy for her overall coordination in organizing this webinar. Thank you, ma'am. It is now the time to pay tribute to our motherland by standing up for national anthem. जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंधु गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे. Thank you all. MES Institute of Management is delighted to thank all the participants once again. Have a good day.
I request all the participants to please fill the feedback form in the chat box. Thank you.
ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಹಾಕ್ದೆ ವೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಲಿಂಕ್ ಬಂತು